Hi, Nance. How are you?
What's going on? It's been a minute.
It's been a while. Yep, since we chatted, I have to say, we were pretty good work life blending our podcast responsibilities this summer, don't you think? We were
I do.
managed to take a couple weeks off and still have some really great recordings to share with our podsters.
Yes, are you feeling the back to school vibe? Are you feeling that yet?
Oh, God, yes. Well, first of all, I live with a teacher, so
Oh,
I
yeesh.
definitely have that. He'll be home next week with a week off and then back into it. Yep.
Back to school. Although I do like it. I think do you think it harkens back to my days of by the way, did you like how I use the word harken?
That was very good, yeah.
I think it harkens back to my days when I would get my pencils and okay, I know that most of you podsters remember the pencil case. Do you remember you would get a new pencil case and a trapper keeper?
Oh, yeah, Trapper Keeper, Pencil Sharpener. Yeah, lots of
That's a
good.
Shabna, yeah. I don't think our less seasoned podsters had that experience. So
Mm,
you like, I would go to Bradley's, remember Bradley's?
of course.
And go get my matching pencil pouch and my folder, and it was very fun. That is to say that, like, I'm feeling the back to school vibe in my business. Are you feeling it in your business?
Absolutely, I'm like, I need to clean out my stuff, get new things,
Mhm.
buy clothes.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah. That's a great segue to next chapters.
Yes.
New
Moving
beginnings,
on.
starting fresh.
That's right.
New times, new pencil case, new times.
That's right, and we're gonna change the definition of golden years.
Oh, all right. Well, you are just jumping right in there. When you talk about next chapters, oftentimes, I think oftentimes people think about retirement, which is interesting. Like it's like I have this 60-year chapter and then I start the next one. I don't, but we'll get to that in a second.
Right.
So tell me about golden years because I think we have very different perspectives on what that means.
I don't know that my perspective is different than yours, but I do think that I have definitely heard people, like, once they get to, like, 60 or whatever, be like, "Oh, well, I'm entering my golden years." And what their meaning is, of course, I'm going to slow down. I'm not going to be working. I'm going to retire and I'm going to sit in a rocking chair now, waiting for whoever is going to call me to the next place. How's that?
I think, yeah, and I don't think the Golden Girls really did a lot to help with that stigma or definition. So what does it mean to you?
So to me, like, come on now. I've been raising kids for a really long time, 23 years, and I don't have to do that anymore. I mean, I have to be involved with them. Well, I don't have to, I choose to. And I've downsized. I'm in a place where I can do what I want to do. I don't really have that many restrictions on my calendar that have to do with other people anymore. So I have time pretty much to do what I want for work
Mhm.
and everything, really, not just work.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it means you're golden, literally. Like you're
Yeah,
golden. You can do whatever you want. Okay, so we kind of jumped right into that golden years. So
right.
before you get your golden years, you have your chapters and chapter one, chapter two, or the next chapter. So we both kind of came up with this topic at the same time or whatever, relatively. And so tell me why, remind me why it was top of mind for you.
Gosh, I'm not really sure. I think that you also left me a message about feeling like one era is closing and one is opening,
Right.
and something about life changes. I don't know if I read something and it triggered it for me,
Oh, you
but
did. You did. Yep. You did. It was yep, you did, about what you're supposed to do and feeling psychologically washed up or something like that. I don't recall, but
oh, right. Yeah, I was saying how we get to a certain age, and for everybody, it's probably different. And maybe you have a bunch of things that go on at once, whether it's health or things in your family, like a kid getting married or someone having a baby. And suddenly you feel old, right? You're like, "Oh my god, this baby is having a baby," or
right.
they're getting married or they're moving on or whatever. And right away we go to, "Oh my god, so much time has passed. Oh my god, I'm getting older." And then like My kids will say, "Oh my god, I feel old." I'm like, "You're 26 and 28. How can you feel old?" But, there's things that make us feel a little worn or a little tired or whatever, and I think when you're up in your 50s and 60s and beyond, that if you mentally feel old and physically feel old, it's tough, right? Like,
Mhm.
you have to try to, like one thing can maybe be like, "Okay, I'm not 25 anymore," but the other one, like, my mind, I feel like, is always in this youthful place. And I think that's a really key thing for seeing things as next chapters and not just the end.
Right.
And, I feel like a lot of people get to the end and they're like, oh, they get to like menopause. Women get to menopause and they're like, well, factory's shut down. I'm just going to sit back and collect my pension. Like, what else am I going to do? Like, what else am I here for? And I was like, why do we feel that way? And I thought, well, first of all, that's what we've been taught for generations, but also because that was to many of us, our sole purpose. And then that purpose is gone. And you're like, well, I guess I'm useless now. I'm washed up. And I know there are a lot of people who don't feel that way too, but I do see a lot of people like, okay, well, now I'm just going to wait for grandchildren
Right.
and it's like there's other things in life.
I mean, it ties back to how you define your worth. So for the people I've been talking to a lot of people lately, and there's a parallel I'm going to get to in a second to what you just said, who are getting ready to retire from their first career, for lack of a better term. So I was speaking in Chicago last week, and one of the women that was at the conference had recently retired from one of her roles. And I caught up with a friend who was probably 5 years, maybe or so away from retirement. And similar to what you said, there's a this is what I've always done and it's who I've always been. Now what? And a lot of what's available as next chapters for people's careers at the end, like so again, for the people that have had the 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever, and they're getting into their retirement chapter, they get kind of reduced to, okay, well, I can do volunteer work. And if they want to do the volunteer work, oftentimes that work is the busy work, and that's not what they want to do. So they have all this talent and they have all these skills. How then can I take these skills and apply them somewhere else after I take a little break? So it's interesting because I don't think that makes them necessarily feel psychologically washed up. I think that it makes them feel almost obsolete, maybe a little lost, maybe a little devalued. And that's tragic because when you think about the knowledge that they have and the institutional knowledge and the experience and everything that they bring, frankly, they're even more valuable to an organization or a company. Like, I don't feel when I'm with a room full of young people, which happens very often, I'm the oldest person in the room. I don't feel old. I feel like I have a lot more experience than these women or people, and I'm going to help them. I'm going to bring them along.
Right.
So it's interesting because it could go the other way. I could just feel old and then I would feel like shit. And that's just not how I feel because if you go into it thinking, here's how I can add value and here's how I can bring other people along, they will feel that, they will see that, they will pick up on that, and they will look up to you
Right.
rather than dismiss you as someone who is washed up or older or whatever. They're like, oh, let's ask her. She's been around a long time. Maybe she'll know. And I think it's somewhat nuanced, but I believe that what you put out in that area is what you get back, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
absolutely. I agree. And one of the questions that I thought of while you were talking was these people who work someplace for 20, 30, 40 years with this, I'm going to retire at X time and I'll have this pension or this retirement or whatever. Do you think that a decent amount of people are just not thinking about what's next until it's right there in front of them?
1,000%. Yeah, for sure. And
Okay.
that's if you go back to that the happiness curve, the book that we talked about a lot, which was in the book Strength to Strength, that's his whole point is that if you wait until your retirement party, well then you're really going to struggle and you're going to feel lost
Mm.
because you didn't invest time, resources, energy into how am I going to live, what am I going to do. That's why I had the 35-page PowerPoint meeting with Danny to talk about what was what was next for him. because I'm like, honey, you can't just wake up one morning and you're retired and think you're going to have a full life. What do you want to do?
Right.
It's scary.
It is scary.
It's scary for a number of reasons. I think it's also facing the fact that that you're done with that chapter. And again, if you define your value or if your worth is tied to what you do, that
Mhm.
is a very big deal to then have that just be gone, like whoosh, poof, gone.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Yep. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I wanna go back to volunteering for a minute. I think that regardless of whether we've had children or not, and this is men or women, probably more women than men, but there's this familiarity to volunteering in that it's a nurturing and caretaking and giving sort of scenario that's very safe and familiar. And who doesn't get praised for volunteering? Right? But the minute
Mhm.
you say, "Oh, I'm going to turn around and have a business," it's like putting yourself in the spotlight alone, and you have to market yourself, which means you have to talk about yourself, which means you have to know how to talk about yourself and understand your value and all of that sort of stuff. And I think it's daunting for people, right? And overwhelming to be like, "Oh, wow, I left," especially if you left corporate, right, and retired from corporate, where there were these other people around. There were these buffers and, clear, like, levels of authority and all that sort of stuff, and then suddenly there's you, and you're like, "Hey, I'm a this specialist, and I'm fabulous," and then we know sometimes people don't agree with what you say, or they have different perspectives, and we focus on those instead of the people who are like, "Wow, I love the way you think." And I think that there's definitely, a self-esteem or worth or, kind of an insecurity in making that transition.
I totally agree. Again, because it's your identity. And
Right.
again, words matter, right? So I have a few friends or a few people that I've heard speak and or introduce themselves. They're like, and I did it when I left Marriott after 25 years. I used to introduce myself and say, well, I used to be with Marriott and now this is what I do, rather than this is who I am and this is what I do. Like you're tied to this past identity. And it can really be a mind, it can really be mind blowing to kind of step into that. It takes a little bit of an adjustment.
Well,
It did for me, and then I've had other friends, the same experience.
right, and I know you were with them for about 25 years, so my question for you is, like, when you started, like, now, there's more and more talk and insistence in every arena about having personal brand, right? Which is personal identity, and that's not necessarily like you would say, "Oh, I work for Marriott," or even as a hairdresser, I'd be like, "Oh, I work at this salon."
Mhm.
Right, instead of saying, "I'm a hairdresser," or you saying, "I'm a sales executive," or
Right, right.
whatever, we're the company was our face or the
Yeah.
person we worked for.
Yes, and that worked out, that paid off,
Mhm.
there was a payoff there, and it's especially for people who are thinking about leaving a company or getting ready to, quote, "retire," and I use air quotes because I think that retirement is not always sitting in the rocking chair, to your point. You have to get yourself ready, and you have
Mhm.
to do the work to get yourself ready for that. Because if you
Mhm.
don't, you're going to be stuck. Like you're going to be very, very lost, very lost. And there's some things you can do for that. What are your values? How do you want to live? Like I said, I joke that I did this 35-page PowerPoint with Danny, but because he was very vague, he was not specific. And, we didn't necessarily have to do a deep dive on it, but I really wanted him to start thinking about how do you want to live? Where do you want to live? What do you want to be doing? What does the perfect day look like? Because you can't just wake up and wave a magic wand and that's what happens. So, if for the podsters who are listening, if you're getting ready for a next chapter, I would encourage you to think about how do you want to live and what do you want your life to look like and to be really specific. One of these exercises was write down a typical day. What does it look like? What are you doing? Who are you with? What are you eating? Where are you living? How are you feeling? And it's
Right.
powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that people also can think that it's like 2 separate things, like, I had this life, and now I'm going over here to live this life,
Mhm.
and really, it's more of a sequel. right? It's more of a continuation because you're taking all this knowledge and skills and all this other stuff that you gained from that 20 or 30 years of work or parenting or whatever. And that stuff comes with you, right? You get to reuse that. You don't leave that behind in that other chapter or that other story. It's a continuation and you can build on it. Like, and I think it's interesting how people think about that. And they're like, oh, those were things that helped me over there, but they're not going to help me over here.
Well, and that's a really good point because when you talk about next chapters, it used to be like major life changes, graduation, kids, retirements. Now we can and we do recreate ourselves anytime we want.
Mhm.
Nobody stays, very few people stay with a company now for 20 or 30 years.
Right.
And part of what I do, and I know part of what you do, is what is your skill set and where else is that valuable, right? So when you're
Mhm.
looking at branding and brand messaging, it, it doesn't matter that I worked for this company. What did I do there, and how does that translate to what I'm going to be doing or what I want to do in the new company or in the next chapter, whatever the case may be? And your inability to articulate that is going to be very detrimental if you can't articulate it.
Right.
And so that's why we say, okay, well, look at what you want to do, how you want to be living, and what skills do you have now that will help you thrive in that next chapter. It sounds a little cliche, but it's true.
Right. Well, and I know that you're a big fan of the high five test, and there are a lot of
Yeah.
strength and personality tests out there. And I always suggest that somebody takes one because it's so easy to say, well, I want to do this, but I don't know how to do this skill that I need for
Mhm.
that thing or
Mhm.
whatever. And so limiting based on what you think you can't do or don't know how to do, when it's much easier to approach things by saying, oh, but these are my strengths and where do they show and how can I use them, as opposed to just scaring yourself, right?
Right, right. How do I use them and how do they benefit people or the company or whatever? Like your strengths is who you are. What's the benefit? What's the value in that? What's the why do they matter? And that, as you know, that's an exercise that we do and we've done. It's in the book. We've done it on the podcast. I have a form for it. So it's here are the strengths that I want to take with me into the next chapter. Why is anybody going to care about those? And when you think about why people care about them, that's defining your value and that will help you figure out what you want to do
Yeah.
because that's how you want to be spending your time.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because one of the reasons why this resonated with me, this was really timely. Beth and I started talking about this when I was on my way back from Chicago at doing a speaking gig. And I lived in Chicago for 5 years, 5 wonderful, wonderful years. I absolutely loved my time there. I always wanted to live there. I got a job opportunity that brought me there. They called me Mary Tyler Medoff because I lived downtown and I wore my sneakers and walked to work. I worked in the Wrigley building. It was an amazingly incredible time in my life and I loved it. And at a certain point, I felt or I knew in my heart that it was time to end that chapter and it was time to go. So, and I honored that. So I said, okay, something's pulling me back. What is it? And how am I going to execute on that? So my question for you, Beth, is how do you think people know when it's time to close a chapter?
Hmm. So I think that it starts to feel robotic. I feel that there's no joy in the game. And I don't, I'm a realist about work, and my husband will back me up on
Mhm.
this. Sometimes, if we're talking about a frustration or a hang up at work, I'll say, well, that's why they call it work and not play, right? Because sometimes it's work and it's challenging. But if it's challenging like that all the time, I think you have to look at it. You don't want to get out of bed, or you're like, how many
Yep,
more sick
yep.
days do I have? Or I'm going to work at home today because I don't want to see the people I work with. Or, you're daydreaming about what else you could be doing with your
Mhm.
time. I think there's so many things. And I think we live with those things even when a job is good for us. But I think when those things start to outweigh all the other positive things that came from work, I mean, I think you lose motivation, you lose inspiration, and you're just like, "I'm tired of this. I'm just tired of it." What do
I
you think?
agree, and I have felt all those things, and I want everybody who feels that way right now to know that you deserve to be happy and thriving and doing what you're doing, and I did that, and it felt horrible for a long time. So yes, you deserve to love what to do what you love to do and only what you love to do. I think that the key is not letting it get to that point. Like you know, I want to say the minute you feel it, you should start thinking about it, but I don't know if that's necessarily fair.
Mhm,
Like, when people say they work in a toxic work environment, I think that's very valid. And I think a lot of people do. You didn't wake up one day and you were in a toxic environment. There were red flags, there were yellow flags, there were pits in your stomach. So, I would say pay attention to the little yellow flags because
mhm.
they're telling you something. And,
Yes.
you know, there's an expression that I used to love called, and it's leap and the net will appear. I
Mhm.
used to love that expression.
Yeah.
And then I realized that it's not smart. You don't leap without a net. You don't leap without at least knowing, you don't leap without a plan. Like, there's got to be some kind of plan. So if you listen to those little signals and you start working on your plan, it might be a year, it might be 2 years, it might be 3 years, it might be 5 years,
Mhm.
it might be 6 months, but nobody, if you don't start planning, you're stuck and you can't move on.
Right. And then
Because
you're frozen. Yeah.
right, right. And that's the worst. That's the worst.
Well, and I think that those are times too where we say, "Oh, remember when I was 35, 28, or whatever, and things were so good and I had so much energy and, people thought I was great at what I did and now I'm washed up. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do." All those things you mentioned about feeling obsolete and devalued. And at the end of the day, I would rather be exactly where I am than to be in my 20s or 30s again.
Yep. Yep.
No doubt. They were great.
Absolutely.
One time through was enough.
Agreed. Agreed. What I want to ask you what advice you would give the 20 or 30-year-olds. And then I want to go back to how when it's time for next chapter because I have a what I think is a great point there. So what advice would you give to the 20 or 30-year-olds who are grinding, for lack of a better term? Because it's really what you're doing. You're happy and you're having fun, but you're
Right?
grinding.
Yes, absolutely. I guess it's kind of a be in the moment thing, right? And be aware of what do you feel your purpose is? Where do you feel that you really shine and you really excel and think into the future, right? We get so many mixed messages about past, present, and future. And it's like live in the moment, but that's like leaping without a net, right? And it's so important. I know we both do this. We take reflection time and planning time and all this sort of stuff to see, well, this is great right now, but what if in a year I could do this? Or what if in 5 years I could do that? Or what if when this job is not for me anymore, I could do this? And just be open to the fact that there are other things and you can start to think about those and daydream and brainstorm and put things in place and meet people that you need to meet. And just there's lots you can be doing and still be doing the job you're in 100% right now.
Absolutely, totally. And that's exactly what I did. And I would add, if you can't figure this out and you need help, there's
Mhm.
plenty of free content out there. Find it, find
Yep.
some podcasts that you like or webinars and hire a coach. That's what they do. There's a reason why they do it. It's because if you could do it yourself, you would.
Right.
And don't you want to follow someone who's already done it and get some guidance? I mean,
Mhm.
really that hiring a coach when I was about 5 years away from leaving my company, absolute game changer. Game
Mhm.
changer. I never would have opened myself up to the possibility or the
Mhm.
possibilities that were out there for me if I hadn't done that. And I just wouldn't have. I just wouldn't have.
Right.
So it's interesting because when I asked you why people start next chapters, you mentioned, okay, well, you're starting to feel like you're phoning it in or it's not feeling great. I totally agree. I also think for me, I know a next chapter is coming when I'm getting excited about something or when I
Mhm.
start gravitating towards something else.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. Like I moved to a small town on Cape Cod and I started getting involved in the town and different committees and I don't want to say politics, but different people who are responsible for running the town. And I'm like, okay, 6 months, 2 years later, I'm like, this is now a very big part of my life. This is a new chapter. This is
Mhm.
Nancy
Right,
2.0 being heavily involved in town government, blah, blah, blah. So if you're happy at work, that's great. There might be something else that's getting your attention that you're gravitating towards. That's a new chapter. And
right.
that's, you know, worth recognizing, I think is what I want to say there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Evolution.
Totally. It's an evolution. I'm just looking through my notes because what I had in my notes was I love this expression, and it's each new, I think it's chapter of your life will it demand a different you.
Mhm,
And I saw that many, many years ago, and I love it. I usually pull it out around the holidays, but because you're gonna, be the perfect person the next year when you
mhm.
get into the holiday season. And I think it's true. Like, and you say that your next chapters keep getting better and better. I agree. And I would add that you're different in in your
Mm,
new chapters. It's a different you, which is so cool. And if you
right,
can look at it from that lens of, well, I used to be this, I'll take me, I used to be a global sales executive flying all over the world, loved it. Mary Tyler Madoff, living in my apartment in Chicago, all that stuff. And this new chapter or the next chapter or the chapter I'm in now, I need to be different. I can't be the same person. That it won't work. It won't work here.
right.
So it's interesting. So it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? You change and then you go into your next chapter, or your next chapter happens and then you change, or do they
Yeah,
both just happen at once? It's kind of cool.
right. Yeah,
The good news is you get to decide. And our ancestors didn't. My grandmother didn't get to reinvent herself.
right. Yeah, mine
Did
either.
yours? No.
No.
So that's something that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
So, what do you think about calls to action?
Calls to action. So it's probably time for people to sit down and do a little reflection, right? Even if
Mhm.
you're happy where you are, where, where do you see yourself?
Mhm.
Um, people write an outline for books, right? And outlines for chapters. So do you have an outline for your life? Well, gee, I'd like to do this in this much time. And, once you have those things, you can kind of back up and say, well, what can I be doing to kind of plan for those things now while I'm still enjoying where I am? Because at some point, I'm going to maybe not want to be in this place anymore. This
Mhm.
chapter is going to end. And just kind of set yourself up for more success and less uncertainty so you can jump in, right?
Yes, and that's what I call engineering your life.
Mhm,
I love the outline idea. We can go old school back to the strengths exercise that's one of my favorites. We'll put the links in there. There's a vision exercise that's in there. So for
mhm,
the OG podsters, you've seen this before. It's one of my favorite things. It's where you draw out your vision. It's kind of cool. We'll put the link in for that.
mhm,
And tons of stuff. And I would say just an awareness around if you feel like something's brewing, pay
mhm.
attention to it because something's brewing,
That's
right?
right.
Cool. All
All right.
right. What else we got?
Let's see what else. Well, after long awaited time, my website's up and running. Mhm.
Whoa.
Yep, looks good. Looks good.
Great.
Mhm.
So that's a great. Why did you decide it was time to do a next chapter of your website?
'Cause to be honest, I never went to my website. I was
Yeah,
just,
I know.
meh. I would go and see it and be like, and things change and trends change in the whole graphic design writing thing. I would go there and I was like, as much as I love this website, it's time. It's
Mm,
time to, it's been 5 or 6 years and I'm
yep,
a different person, a very different person than I was that long ago. So,
I love it. I love it. I love it. So check it out. It's that'saspade.com, right?
yes, thank you.
Great. And you're networking,
I will write our Women's
give
Business League chapter.
me
It's Women's Business League. It's the Mansfield chapter,
yep.
and it's a really great networking opportunity.
So check those out, Podsters. We are back in action.